Hello there. You're listening to 10 Questions, where we discuss the wetplate collodion process and the photographers that create these unique images known as ambrotypes and tintypes. I'm your host, Chad Shryock, wetplate photographer for Pork Pie Photography based in Fort Collins, Colorado. In each episode, I've asked a modern-day practitioner to sit down with me and talk about how they got involved with this vintage process, share some information on their gear and studio, and provide some valuable insights into their creative process. So whether you're just beginning to dabble your toes in the collodion ethers, or you're a seasoned silverbath expert, hang on and see what develops with 10 Questions. In this episode, we're going to talk to a wetplater that's been respecting the chemistry for over a decade. One of the early members of the Collodion Bastards Facebook group, this chemist turned photographer has been experimenting with the chemical side of the process from start to finish: collodion, developer, and varnishes. Based in Los Angeles, California, I'd like to welcome Brian Cuyler to 10 Questions. Hey, Brian, how are you?
Hey, Chad. Good. How are you?
Doing well, thank you. Thanks for being on the podcast. I really appreciate you spending some time, and I'll let you know that you are going to be the season closer this year.
Oh, wow. That's a lot of pressure.
A lot of pressure. So, hey, Brian, give us an idea how long you've been involved in the wetplate community.
I've been doing wet plate since 2012. So in 2012, I was shooting film, and I saw some images on Flickr, if anybody remembers Flickr.
Right.
And I was like, what is that? And it just, I was drawn to it, and then went down the whole rabbit hole of, oh my God, this is chemical based. I can make my own, my own emulsions or my own sensitized plates to, capture images. And it was just, that was the beginning. So
that's great. So were you involved with any of the online communities during 2012?
Yes. So going back to 2012, there were, I think, all the ones except for Collodion Bastards were there. And there was one other one, which was a little more sort of uptight in a sense. And that's kind of what sparred Gerald to start the Collodion Bastards, just sort of more sort of open and just trying new things and not so stuck on, this is how things should be.
Sure. And I'll admit, I think whenever I was first getting into it, the Bastards page was one of the first groups that I found online and really picked up a lot of good information and at least got to see some of the different folks that were involved in the community. And one thing I've always said is that if you do get involved with any of these online groups, there's probably a place for you. You don't necessarily have to be an advocate for all of them, but there's a place out there for you to fit in.
Absolutely. And even going back to that 2012, I think that's when Shane started his mask series, where he sent these gas masks around to different wet platers, and he had people make a plate and then send in the plate and then send the mask on to the next person signed up. So I was part of that also.
Right. Yeah, I think right whenever I was getting into the process, the mask series was kind of winding down at that point. In fact, I kind of think that the first time that I had met Shane, the mask was back in his possession, and I think he actually asked me if I wanted it at that time, and I'm like, I'm still trying to figure things out, and then I think I missed the window for it. I think it shut down shortly after that, so that's good. No, I did go back. It looked like the Bastards group formed in January of 2013, and looked like you were kind of there from the start of that group, and it's kind of funny how it started off pretty small, but has grown to really one of the larger groups on Facebook now, so that's good.
Yeah, it's amazing how many people are in the group.
So you mentioned that your first exposure to wetplate was really the online environment. Had you not seen any like tintypes or wet plates prior to that in person?
My parents actually had several tintypes, sitting in a case in the living room, since I was a kid, and I'd seen them and looked at them, and I just, I saw them as old photos. I don't know that I ever even, picked them up. So as soon as I saw it, I knew what those were, but I never experienced them outside of that. And I was very drawn to, when I was shooting film, into like the Holga look and sort of the a little bit less precise look of certain things. So when I saw the wet plates, I'm like, that's really cool. I like the way the tones are rendered, and just the look of the plate. It's totally unique.
Right, right. Well, I think most folks are familiar with you and your work through UV Photographics. Talk about what were you doing before finding the process?
Before finding the process, I think, early 2000s, sort of the digital DSLRs were out there. So I was shooting digital, and, that sort of got me back into photography, after being away from it for, many years, basically from when I was much younger. Then that led to, I saw something where you could develop film with caffeinol, so caffeine and
Okay, yep.
coffee. And I'm like, that's chemistry. That sounds really cool. I want to do that. So I went out and I bought a Brownie Hawkeye flash, which was the camera I shot when I was like 10 years old. My parents gave it to me, and I would go around and shoot all kinds of different things. And I still have a photo album of, square photos from that camera. So I bought that camera, I bought some film, and then I bought some coffee, some Folgers, whatever, and some caffeine, and I made caffeinol, and I shot a roll, and I developed it, and it was just like, I loved the look. I thought everything looked, sort of had that cool aesthetic that I liked. And then it just, went on from there to like Holgas and 4x5, and then, 4x5, and then, there's bigger film than that, and just started shooting a lot of film. And I was shooting quite a bit of film at the point that I had discovered, wetplate.
Sure.
That was even more chemistry, focused. I'm like, this is even better than developing film.
Sure, sure. And we should mention that your background from an educational standpoint is in some form of chemistry, correct?
Yeah, so I was trained as a chemist. My first job out of college was in a lab, and there's actually a tie-in to wetplate. It's very obscure, and I don't think anyone realizes, but all the aluminum, black aluminum, the trophy plate that we shoot on, it's all painted at a coil line. So these big coils of steel go down this moving coil line, and they get coated, and then they get painted with the black paint, and then they get coiled back up, and they get sent to a place that they slit it, and they chop it up into the larger plates, and then I take them and chop them into 4x5 and 8x10 and all of that. But I worked at the company that developed some of the treatments that went on the metal that goes on to the coil metal that gets painted for all kinds of different things, not just trophy plate. But so there was a tie-in to my first job, actually, to tintypes as they are practiced today.
Right. No, that's interesting. I had actually reached out to the folks at Main Trophy Supply for this podcast just to see if I could get someone to kind of talk about, a little bit about their process, and, were they really aware that wet platers are using their materials in this process, and they are very secretive about how they actually create these plates. So I thought that was kind of interesting. There's a lot of IP around that, I guess.
Yeah, I've asked them, like, I know what type of aluminum it is, but I haven't been able to get the type of paint that they use or they specify. I think if I went back to my old contacts in that world, I probably could find out.
Yeah, so after you had seen these images online, and of course it sounds like you were somewhat familiar with them just from having photos at your home, what was your process to actually go figure out how to do it, how to learn how to actually create these images?
I think the first thing I did is I bought Mark Osterman's manual, and I read that. And then from that point, I bought the raw materials, and I mixed up, I think, a batch of Old Workhorse, and then some developer, I think I was using Rapid Fixer for fix, and then a silver bath. And I mixed it all up. And then Gerald from the Collodion Bastards, called me up. He said, I just went and took a workshop up in Indianapolis from Dale Bernstein, and I want to go take it again. So why don't you come with me? So I went up there with him, and then ended up taking a workshop from Dale in Indianapolis, and that probably jump-started a lot of sort of things that I might have done wrong. So, my first plate came out great, and I had several worse plates after that, but once you sort of go through and say, okay, I can do this, and then taking the workshop from Dale sort of helped me identify things that I wouldn't have got just reading the manual. Although, I think you can watch YouTube and all that and learn in different ways. But for me, it was great to take that workshop.
Sure. And what time frame was this?
That was in like summer of 2012.
Okay. So still pretty early days of YouTube, so there probably wasn't a ton of wet plate material out at that time, not like there is today, but there were probably a few folks that were recording and actually showing that process. I always find it interesting of how people have learned the process back in those early days, just because there weren't as many people actually performing it back then. So kudos to Dale
Yeah, I
for putting on a
remember.
workshop.
Yeah, and he had been shooting 10 years before that. So like when we took the workshop in 2012, he had already been shooting for 10 years. So like imagine him trying, imagine all these early guys like Osterman and Koffer and all that. They didn't have any of what we have right now. So it was much more difficult just to understand just from reading how to do something, because a lot of this is very technique based. So, and I remember watching a YouTube video where I don't know who it even was, but someone was pouring a collodion plate and it was really thick, like honey, and it was like really slow. And I'm like, wow, that's interesting. And then when I started doing it, I'm like, oh, this is not, not the best way to flow a plate with this really thick sort of, viscous collodion.
Right, right. So during those early days, were you shooting mostly portraits? Were you doing any landscape work? What was your kind of genre that you were focused in on?
I was shooting, so I tend to shoot my family and my kids the most. So I was shooting a lot of portraits of my kids. So I was using like compact fluorescents and trying to get as much light, on my portrait or my subjects as possible. And then Gerald and I spent some time doing night plates. So I lived in Nashville at the time, and we went out into downtown Nashville at night and like did plates at night, which was kind of interesting.
Nice, nice. These days, do you still consider yourself to be a portrait photographer, or have you had to focus more on the chemical supply side of the process?
Yeah, my focus right now is mainly the business, but the business involves, so we do workshops. So I do workshops with a friend of mine, Mike Chelinsky. He's from Modern Tinted Photo, so he's based in Los Angeles. So we do workshops maybe every 2 or 3 months. We'll have a small workshop, and I actually like the workshops because I actually can shoot some plates. So if you look at my Instagram for UV Photographics, the plates that I shoot, I probably shot those at a workshop.
Okay. Yeah, I got to think it's probably a challenge to find that balance between, okay, I've got new recipes that I want to try out, so I have to take, a bunch of test shots versus, hey, I want to get back to shooting my family and friends and doing kind of portraiture work that you were involved with early on.
Yeah, I've got stacks of test plates. I think the house across the street from my house, I probably have like 300 of those plates. So I should go across the street and say, hey, do you want one of these up your house? Um,
Yeah. So, Brian, when UV Photographics started up, was it more of a way to supply chemistry to yourself and friends online, or did you see kind of a gap in the marketplace that you could fill?
it was partially a gap. I think everybody can get anything they needed from Bostic or from Mike at Artcraft. But I was interested in, at the time, like cadmium-free formulas. And I'd been reading a lot of the early literature, and there were just some formulas that didn't look similar to anything that was out there at the time. So I made some of those, and I tested them, and made some variations, and I found that I like the ability to control several different things like the speed and the longevity of the collodion. And so once I started mixing those, I'm like, well, if I like them, then maybe someone else is going to like them. So I built a website and just sort of slowly added products to the website, and didn't really do that much other than talking about a little bit on Bastards. That was sort of like the only marketing channel that I was using. And I was using a website I scripted myself, and I bought some code for the shop and all that, but it was, it didn't have like good search engine, features and all that stuff. So it was just kind of there.
Right. Well, I will say it's a very niche market, right? With the chemistry that's involved with this process, and you are one of a very few handful of places where folks can go to and get reliable chemistry. So I'm congratulate you on that for keeping that business up, for sure. Tell us a little bit about the studio that you currently work in, or maybe the studio that you actually shoot a lot of these test plates with.
Well, the test plates are usually shot, at my house. The studio that we use for the workshop, so that's just across the river from the Arts District downtown LA. So it's owned by Mike Chalinsky, who is he basically runs a tintype studio out of there most days under Modern Tintype Photo. And so actually when I arrived in LA, Gerald ended up, because Gerald was selling some varnish online, and he had told Mike that I had just arrived in LA, and Mike looked me up, and then we met. Basically, I meet several people around town in sketchy areas to exchange money for chemistry and stuff. But anyway, we met, and we just sort of we hit it off. And he started shooting more once he got my chemistry, and he grew his studio into a tintype studio. And then one day we were kind of chatting, and he said that many people were contacting him to sort of learn the process and maybe do a workshop, but he didn't feel comfortable enough to go over the chemistry part of it. So we teamed up and said, I'll handle the chemistry part of it, and you can assist with the photo taking and the sort of artistic side of it, and and give your spin on different aspects of the process. And then that was I don't know how many years that was, I don't know, like 4 or 5 years ago. But so the studio's old building that was used for, I don't even remember what it's used for, but it was it's probably built in the 20s, and it's it's got a lot of character, brick, cool windows, but then it also backs up to the LA River. So if we shoot indoors for a while, and we can go out back and we can shoot various sort of urban scenes like around the LA River. So it's definitely kind of a cool place to shoot.
Nice. Have you given any thought to putting together a manual that is specifically focused on the chemistry aspect of collodion?
I have a little bit. I feel that there's, between, Quinn's book and Mark's manual and Coffer's manual, there's a lot out there. I could probably do a little bit more of a modern interpretation of some of the things, but I have been thinking about doing more of a chemistry specific workshop where we come in and do, let's actually just make the collodion from scratch. We can, make a silver bath from silver instead of just buying it. Same thing with developer. And then I'll have to save up some old silver baths and go over like silver bath maintenance and things like that. Sort of people, when they take the workshop, they'll run for a while, and just anybody who buys the kit or whatever, they'll run for a while, and all of a sudden they start hitting, issues. So if I could find ways to sort of show people how to maintain your chemistry and keep it clean, that might be a useful workshop for people.
There you go. Yeah, you can take some silver baths and throw some dirt in them or something to clean up, right?
Well, I've basically seen a silver bath it looked like mud.
Yeah.
I don't think there was any silver left in it.
Wow. Well, let's chat a little bit more about the chemistry. Whenever you first started in the process, were you making your own chemistry at that time, or were you kind of purchasing whatever kits may have been available then?
Yeah, so I started off, I just bought the plain collodion, I bought the salts, and I mainly was using, I think, Old Workhorse up until the time I started playing around with different formulas, which was like 2014 or so. Yeah, so I was just shooting. I was more interested in the image and the images I was getting than, sort of messing with the chemistry at that point. So early on, it was just trying to get enough light so I could, reduce my exposures, and we play around a lot with. We used a complex fluorescence, and then Gerald had bought this huge grow light. It was like the light bulb was like the size of a kitten, and you could get the exposures down to like a second or so, but your subject was almost blind
They were
by the end
blinded.
of it. So
Yeah, it's kind of a trade-off there for sure. What kind of research were you doing early on whenever you were starting to develop some of your own custom recipes for wetplate?
yeah, so I was reading a lot of literature from like from the 1850s, 60s, and 70s, and then there's some literature from Kodak that was you know still making chemistry up until like the 30s. So I was just reading a lot of that and trying to understand from a chemical sense of what was happening. So when someone says, "Hey, you need to add acetone to your red collodion," like what's that doing? And try to understand sort of the chemistry of what's happening when you make a fresh batch and then it gets more yellow over time, sort of what's going on there, just to try to get a better, deeper understanding of the chemistry. So then when I start to formulate, I'm not just sort of like shooting in the dark. I can have some sort of theory behind why I'm doing something. And then hopefully with some tests and some experiments, I can prove some of that out. I think some of the earlier formulas were more of a just sort of a systematic, okay, try this, adjust this, try this, and shoot again, and then seeing what direction things were going. But then over time, I've spent more time just sort of trying to understand what's going on.
So based on some of your research, is there an optimum collodion that you found that was existing, from the 1850s through the 1880s that was already well documented that people were using?
Well, everyone had a formula, and it seemed like by the later years of collodion, a lot of people were shooting negatives. So a lot of the formulas seem to work really well for negatives, and maybe they're not optimized for positives. But these days, it seems like everyone's really into shooting positives. So I think a lot of sort of that later work from like the 1870s and 80s or whatever wasn't tailored to positives. So there was, I think, the early there was room to research and grow sort of the collodions for positives. I think that's where I've spent a lot of time, is trying to make a great collodion for positives. And so if someone wants to shoot a negative, I've got recommendations. I'm not sure any of the collodions I have will work for negatives, but they're more geared towards positives.
Yeah. What was there a base recipe that you were able to find and then just make, I guess, small tweaks to it based on your chemical knowledge that you have to be able to fit into those different situations? So whether it was for negatives, if you're looking for speed, you're looking for longevity, were those types of recipes already existing, or were those things that you were able to just kind of put together yourself based on your research?
I started with some sort of existing formulas, like there's a Carey Lee formula formulas, like for like he's got like a formula number 3, number 2, number 1, or whatever. I spent a lot of time with those, just trying to understand how those worked. But then I started changing out the salts. So, like I said, my early focus was trying to do cadmium free. So, like instead of using cadmium iodide, cadmium bromide, what happens when you use lithium bromide, lithium iodide? And so, just understanding how those salts change the collodion, and as far as longevity and speed, and what's the best sort of concentration of those in the collodion. So I spent a lot of time with that, just trying to take sort of existing formulas, convert them to cadmium free, and then shoot those and then adjust those based on sort of the results I was getting.
Yeah. Okay, what is the one thing that you wish that people knew more about concerning wet plate chemistry? What is it that's kind of out there now that is kind of a misunderstanding that a lot of people have? Let's set the story straight.
I don't know if there's like one thing. For me, it's keep everything clean. Use fresh as fresh chemistry as you can. And a lot of times the chemistry gets blamed for things that are most likely, or a lot of times it's technique related or physical. A lot of times someone will send me an image and they'll say, the collodion, it's got this weird spot over here, but the rest of the image is fine. So something's happening with the collodion. So collodion is not smart enough to work in one area and not the other area. So I spent a lot of time sort of helping people figure out what's going on in the process to identify issues that are causing different things. And some of that even comes from the workshops. We were doing a workshop and this one woman kept on getting this one defect in the middle of the plate. And we were trying to figure out what's happening. Why are you getting this one defect? What are you doing when you develop? What are you doing? And so then I just started to follow her around. And then so I was watching it, and she would load the plate holder, and she'd go to the camera to set up her shot, but she would set the plate holder face down. And so what was happening was the silver was basically rolling to the middle of the plate and then causing basically defect in the middle with the sort of crusty silver. So that was, again, like a lot of times if someone sends me something, I've probably done it myself or seen someone do it, and then it's easier for me to identify what's going on. That's my biggest thing is, if you've got something that works for you, and don't mess with it. Just keep doing it. That way, when something happens, it's easier to root cause what's going on. If you change 50 things and like all of a sudden something's not working, don't dump out your silver bath and all your chemistry. Let's see what's going on.
Right. I mean, the developer, the collodion, those seem to be the kind of easiest things to kind of work out, if you just want to start from scratch, right? But I think one of the things that I've struggled with is just trying to keep a regimen of proper silver bath maintenance and making sure that I'm, sunning occasionally. I did a real heavy maintenance a few weeks ago where I, boiled it down and put in the kaolin clay, just to kind of pull everything out. That really made me nervous, doing those kind of things. But, you just got to, every once in a while, it kind of helps to do that level of maintenance. And then what I struggled with, and then I go to take some test shots and I put my plate holder in backwards and then wondered why I didn't have any images. So
why is it black?
Yeah. Exactly. So you've also went through the experience of building your own camera at least once. What really motivated you to do something like that?
Yeah, so I always have a project. I always have to have a project that's not related to UV photographics or anything else I'm doing. So, and that usually involves photography, even if it's a photography project. But so when I got to LA, there was a guy advertising a 24-inch Aero Ektar on eBay, but he had spelled it wrong. And I was watching it, and he kept on lowering the price. And when it got down to like a really low price, I'm like, I'm just going to buy it. So I ended up buying it. And there's a whole story of like this. He was a really strange guy, and I ended up getting two of them for like less than $200. And so now I had this huge lens, but nothing to do with it. So that sort of my first inkling was, okay, well, I'm just going to mount this on sort of a box, and I'll make sort of a sliding box camera, and I'll make some sort of jerry-rigged plate holder, and I'm going to shoot a 16 by 20 plate. Of course, then that evolved into building a full-on bellows 16 by 20 camera, and that was like, wow, that was over a year project of learning how to, every project tends to cause me to learn other things. So like I had to learn how to do hand cut dovetails and all this kind of stuff to make the camera how I wanted to make it. And then making the plate holder was a challenge. And then I found out that, a silver tank that takes 6 liters of silver nitrate is very expensive even for me.
Exactly.
to fill.
That'll motivate you to start up your own chemical supply company there, just to be able to produce those kind of plates.
Yeah, so my opinion is everyone should start shooting 16 by 20 or bigger.
Exactly. How much collodion do you need for a 16 by 20 plate?
It's like 50 mils or so.
Okay, well, That's not too bad.
So it's not too
That's
bad.
reasonable.
It's
Yeah.
not too bad.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's just filling the silver bath and keeping that amount of silver on hand is a challenge.
Would be very good for business though if everybody shot plates those size.
Yeah, there's a guy that he came to LA and he wanted to learn about it. And then he went back to, I forget where he lived. He lived sort of northwest area. And he called me up and said, I'm ready to shoot. He bought a Chamonix 16 by 20 and all the stuff to go with it. And he said, I'm going to start off with 16 by 20. I'm like, you are amazing. I love you. But
Good luck.
he started off making plates. And he did a few things wrong, but once he got going, it was fine.
Well, I know last week I talked to Kurt Moser, and he kind of did the same thing, right? He started shooting these 20 by 24 inch plates. That was the first size plate that he shot on. And I said, kudos to you for, starting that big. Why not go the normal route and go with the 4x5 like the rest of us? But he jumped in head first.
Yeah, no, there's several people that started big and stayed big, like Lindsay up in Santa Barbara and Luther and all those guys. They like the big plates.
So give me the rundown of the different collodions and developers that you actually manufacture and provide to folks in the community. Because I know you got some different flavors out there. What are they, and what are they best used for?
Yeah, so I guess the first one, which was one of the first cadmium-free formulas, was UVP3. So that one is very fast, but because it's using lithium salts, it tends to age quickly. So it's best to get that one in two-part, mix up enough to use for several weeks or whatever, and then you don't end up with a gallon of red collodion that you can't shoot. And then after that, there was a UVP1, which was slower than that. I tend not to recommend that one anymore. If you want cadmium free, I would just shoot UVP3. And then from there, there was a UVP4, which was a slightly slower version of, it wasn't cadmium free, but it was slightly slower than the 3, but it had really nice tones. And what was really nice about that was, for some reason, it was really easy to see when you developed it. And so I thought that was kind of interesting. So I use that in a lot of workshops. So when people are learning to develop, it's easy to see the image come up. So UVP4 is good for that. And it's a little bit slower, so it's good for, sometimes I struggle with collodion outside. So if it's really bright outside and you're using a wide open lens, you can't get the lens cap on and off fast enough to get a good exposure or a controlled exposure. So that's good for that. And then after that, I came up with the UVPX, which is slightly faster than the 4, and it's very robust. It's easy to see when you develop it. It's long lasting. It doesn't age really quick, and it's just got really nice tones. It works really well.
And that's the 4 or the X?
The X.
The X. Okay. Yep.
And then, so I just had that. Those were sort of the mainstays for forever till just recently. So I wasn't planning on doing anything more, but I thought I had some time and I just wanted to understand the chemistry some more. So I started doing some experiments and then tried a bunch of different stuff. And I came across some things that sort of led me to sort of a different direction from X. And then that became the number Z, which has only been out, I don't know, 3 months or something like that, which is probably as fast as the UVP3. It's not collodion, or it's not cadmium free, but it's fast, but it's long lasting. So think of sort of the best of both worlds. It's fast and it's got good longevity. It's not going to turn red on you. So I've been shooting that in the workshops and just shooting it myself just to get a good feel for it. I've sent it to several people just to sort of get their feedback. And then the only thing I've got in the works is I want to do basically that same chemistry, but I want to slow it down. So back to the shooting outdoors with a wide open lens, I wanted to have something that's a little bit slower, more controlled, that you don't have to have a shutter to expose. And that's probably going to be the next one. It's going to be number S. I sent sort of pre versions to Camp Tintype for people to win in the raffle.
Okay. And when you say it has longevity, what are we talking about? How many months?
I'd say 12, 18.
That's pretty amazing. I've seen some of the historical recipes listed to where they say that, okay, you've got to let this one sit for at least a few months. At 6 months, it's pretty good. At 12 months, it's really good. I mean, that just blows me away that you could let collodions sit around for that long and still be usable. Because that's not been my experience with, my kind of standard old workhorse formulation.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that has to do with the salts and then how fast they go off. And then what's happening is it gets acidified, and that breaks down the nitrocellulose in the collodion. Which, by the way, is another sort of input to the rest or to the formulas. Is I make my own collodion from scratch. I'm not buying raw collodion from any supplier because I want to control the nitrocellulose levels. And the grade of the nitrocellulose in the collodion, because that does have an effect on things.
So you're making your own gun cotton for those formulations?
No, I'm not. I'm not going to go that far.
Okay.
Although I would just because I tend to go down like rabbit holes like that.
I was
Just
really
to see if
getting
I
my
can do
hopes
it.
up there for a second because that's something that I've thought about. Why not just try to make it just from scratch and really go scratch? But no, I've not attempted that yet.
No, it's actually so with all the supply chain issues from the pandemic, like getting raw nitrocellulose has been a challenge. Some of the grades I was getting before are no longer available, and so it may come to me actually having to make my own, but I hope it doesn't get to that.
There you go. You want to do that at the studio, not at your house, though.
Yeah, that'll be in the warehouse. That's it's a little it's got a fire suppression system, so that's much better.
Right, right. Let's talk about projects that you may have going on, or even different people that you would like to photograph. If you had the chance to photograph anybody, who would it be?
God, I don't even know. I don't know who I would photograph. I just like photographing interesting people. At one of the workshops we had someone. She was basically going to clown school or clown college, and she brought in one of her classmates who was a mime, and it was just fun to shoot, just something completely different. I don't know. I tend to like. I don't know. I like sort of more kind of gritty people, I guess. I'll shoot my landscaper. I've done some because so being here in LA, I do assist with a lot of people that shoot. So Mike does a lot of stuff where I'll get commissioned to shoot an event or whatever, and we shot like sort of like I call it the aging rock stars birthday party. There was so many like old rockers,
Yeah.
and then but there's I've been assisted on stuff that was in movies, and so I've kind of had brushes with sort of like shooting more famous people and stuff, but I don't know if I've got any one person that I would, I'm dying to shoot. I just anybody who wants to sit for me and is willing is probably my target.
Yeah. I think that's the one kind of drawback to this process is like a street photographer could walk around and find somebody that looks very interesting to them and just walk up to them and say, "Hey, can I take your image?" But for us, it's a lot different. So it's a lot more luck of the draw on who's actually walking into the studio, and it would be nice if you could just have your collodion kit with you all the time and it's ready to go. But that's just not the case.
Well, on that note, I do have I built basically it's a small box that goes in the trunk of my car, and it's got two armholes in it. I think you've probably seen variations of this online,
This is the bastard
but
box, right?
it's basically it's an evolution of the bastard box. So I've taken that and I've got an old Kodak Brownie that takes like a 3 by 5 inch plate, and so I'll go like to the beach or whatever, and I'll set up at the back of my car, and I'll make a plate and I'll go around and I can shoot. I've shot like surfers and stuff. Like, so it's, you can, I was trying to get to the level of this is as good as you can do street shooting tintypes. So it's, you're tied to wherever you can walk from your car, but there's, especially around here, there's plenty of people and things to shoot with. That's always a fun adventure.
Sure. Is this something that you think will turn into a project and maybe some collection of images based on out of the back of the car street photography?
Maybe I have this sort of desire. I built this, another camera I built was based on another lens that I bought that was like a 8.25 inch like wide angle lens. And I shot in an 8x10 and it was okay. So I ended up making a fixed focus 4x12 camera that doesn't take a plate holder. You have to take the camera into the darkroom and slide the plate in, but it takes really cool pano plates. So I wanted to go out and shoot. So it's perfect for shooting like at the beach of a pier. So if you imagine like a long pier going out into the ocean with whatever stuff they've got on the end, like Santa Monica or Hermosa Beach or whatever. That's so what I wanted to do, sort of like beach and piers and stuff like that with that camera at some point. But I'd have to have time and I'd take a little bit of effort to drive up the coast or whatever. But definitely something I've been thinking about.
Sure. What is your kind of mainstay from a camera that you might use in your studio?
I love the old like studio cameras with the studio stands. Like once you've used one of those, like a tripod camera on a tripod is so awkward and sort of messy. Like the ability to sit there and crank the camera down, adjust the tilt, and then move it back and forth on the wheels. That's sort of the easiest for portraits.
Yeah, you're talking about the old school studio stands,
old school,
right? Yeah, okay.
Yeah, like the Century stands. Yeah, those things I love. Like if you've got the space, they're great. If you don't have a lot of space, then you're tripping over the camera as you're walking around. And
right,
stuff.
Right.
But that's my ideal. If I had to shoot just one format, I'd probably shoot like 5x7, and then have the ability to do 4x5s. I just recently built a kit for that, just so I can be more sort of flexible and mobile.
Any special or antique lenses that you use, or more modern day optics?
I don't have a ton of lenses. One of my favorites is the Heliar 420 or 42 centimeter. I guess that's how they do it. I love that for portraits. I've got it's basically a copy. It's the Bausch & Lomb copy of the Dallmeyer 3A, which is it does some pretty cool things. So I like that for portraits on sort of, I guess, whole plate sizes. And then other than that, I've got like my first lens was this little gem Petzl that I bought off of Gerald for like $100, and I still use that today. It just barely covers 4x5, but it's got a really unique look, and it's very cool.
Nice. I've got a quote from you. So I did find some dirt on you. In December of 2013, there was a quote that said, "Wetplate in general is now hipster. It's time to dust off the Digicam, right?" This was back in 2013. Is wetplate even more hipster now, 10 years later?
It is. So I have the ability to see who's buying chemistry. I'm not selling to everybody in the world or in the U.S., but I got a feel for like demographics wise who's buying chemistry. So a lot more younger people are getting into it. So they're finding film kind of like the same way that probably a lot of us find it. You're shooting film and then you find this and you want to do it because it's so cool. So a lot of younger people coming into it. And I find a lot of females are getting into it. Like when we were doing it, it seemed like it was more male centric, kind of like this, you're mixing chemistry and all this stuff. But, I would say it's almost close to 50-50 these days.
Okay. So you probably do have access to some really great insider info as far as the number of people that are doing this. How close do you think we are to saying that, okay, yeah, there's probably 1,000 people worldwide? I mean, are you able to make that kind of estimation? Do you feel like it's more than that? less than that. What?
It's
It's
more than that.
yeah,
Well, I find it funny because, especially in LA, there's so many people doing different things. And a lot of times I'll see that there's somebody right down the street from somebody else that's shooting wet plate and they don't know each other.
yeah,
And everyone's in their own little LA bubble. So maybe they don't want to know each other, but it's kind of funny that there's so many people that are in the same proximity and they don't know of their existence or, what they're doing. Because not everybody's on Facebook and bastards. When they hear about it, they're like, what is that again?
yeah.
So it's funny just to see who's out there shooting and how they find it and how they find me is always interesting. So it's definitely. So I can only speak for the U.S. and Canada and a little bit of Mexico, but definitely more than 1,000 in
Yeah.
that region.
I agree with that. I mean, at least from what I've seen, I mean, for a while it seemed like everybody was kind of very spread out away from each other, and now it seems like there are tintype photographers all over the place. Maybe it'll get back to the point where it was in the 1870s where there were tintypers all over the place. So I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah, I find it. Yeah, I find it interesting that. Well, the nice thing about being in LA is a lot of people come to LA. So I meet people from all over the U.S. that eventually come out here for one reason or another, and a lot of times I'll meet up with them and we'll chat. Like I've met Carla. She's been out here. She's from BLK Hand, and just meet people that, hey, can I get some chemistry? I'm going to go drive up the coast and make some plates and stuff like that. So it's just cool. It's interesting. The other thing that there's people that they've been doing it ever since I've been selling. Right? They're still doing it. But then you see some people that come into it and then they'll leave, and then you'll see new people come into it and then they stay for a while and leave. So it's kind of got a mix of people like sort of like the long haulers and the people that are going to come in, they try it, and then they go on to something else.
Right. Yeah. I don't know what the minimum time frame is, but it seems like if you can break over that, 2 year period of being pretty heavy into it, then maybe you can stick with it. But, I think there's a lot of folks that take a workshop or so and then they just never get the chance, or, they don't want to make that investment into to getting all the gear that might be needed. And so it kind of falls by the wayside. But I think there's enough people out there now that we don't have to worry about it going away anytime soon.
Right. I mean, there's enough people supplying the chemistry, and yeah, I think I think it's only going to grow.
Yeah, one thing that I would love to be able to organize is a way to keep track of all the people that are actually in the practice. Be able to have like a map that shows, okay, hey, if you're traveling around the middle of Kansas, here are a few wet platers that, if you want to look up. It would be nice to have a way to be able to see kind of where everybody is distributed across the country.
There is a Google Maps for wet platers, but it's really outdated because no one knows about it. I'll have to see if I can find it. I could send you a link.
Great.
But it's basically, it was that idea, right? So everybody go in and put your name in, put your location, and then so you could bring it up, and it was global, so you could bring it up and you can say, oh, there's all these red dots here, and there's all these red dots here. But then that the effort of keeping something up to date like that is a bit of an effort.
Right. Well, I will challenge all the listeners that once we get that link, we'll post it up, and if you can go in and fill out your information, it'll just make it that much more easier for people to find you. So, okay, Brian, who were some of the early wet platers that maybe you reached out to early on for help, or just kind of getting started?
And I'm not sure. Early on, I didn't, other than talking to Dale and taking his workshop and reading Mark's manual. Not in the early days. I really didn't talk to too many people. It was more after I started selling the chemistry that I talked to Mark. I talked to Will Dunway before he passed away. When Luther was out here, I used to meet Luther in a sketchy parking lot to give him collodion. And then I've talked to Quinn on the phone about some things that were going on with the plain collodion he was using to do colloidal chloride prints and stuff like that. So, I've been in touch with them and talked with them. But early on, I didn't really, other than Mark was, a lot of Mark and Quinn were always online, so you can always just sort of directly talk to them online and stuff like that.
Right. And I guess if you've got Mark and Quinn as contacts online, I mean, you really don't need a lot of other folks to reach out to you, right?
Yeah, no, yeah, it's they've seen everything, so it's pretty easy.
Who are some of the photographers of today that might inspire your work, or folks that you look up to, maybe think that they're doing some pretty creative stuff?
I think there's a lot of people doing sort of like the sort of pop-up portraits. So like you talk to Joe Brown or Joseph Brown, I think on your podcast.
Yep, great guy.
I think he's one of the best out there. But then there's people like McShane's got his studio, Tim Brown's got his studio in Colorado. Lindsay, I know I love her huge plates. She went out to New York and she shot, I think, the Brooklyn Bridge, and then she made prints off of that. She made prints off of that, and then made an ambrotype out of the original. And that was I thought that was cool, because then you can't make any more prints because you've coated the back. I've always liked what Joni Sternbach's been doing. I've known her since the sort of my early days. I made a plate rack, and she had contacted me and said, "Hey, could you donate some of those for," I think it was the Penumbra Foundation in New York there. And so I sent her some plate racks, and so then she's always been in touch. And there's people like I said, Mike doing his portraits here in downtown. Conrad, he's down in San Diego. Conrad Ron Young. This is someone she's not in any of the groups, like Erica White's. She's done some interesting things. She's like right down the street from the LA studio. Yeah, I just like a lot of the people doing portraits, out in the wild or in the studio. And then even the grand, landscapes and stuff like Lindsay and stuff like that. I think it's just. I wish I had the time to go try to do something like that.
Yeah, very inspiring work from some of those folks, especially the ones they're really dealing with some of the big plates and a lot of the struggles that come with, moving that material around to capture big landscapes. So, what is the biggest struggle that people deal with concerning chemistry? You probably have a lot of people reach out to you for chemical issues. What are some of the big ones, and how do you kind of point them in the right direction?
A lot of times it's silver bath. Some people will just run their silver bath into the ground. I think if you maintain your silver bath, that'll fix a lot of issues. Make sure that it's clean, filtered, sun it as much as you can, and you can just run for I don't know how long, just sun, filter after so many sessions or whatever. And, you can just keep running and making sure you're topping up with fresh silver. Your silver bath will stay good. It's never as good as the first day because you're adding all of these cadmium and stuff to the bath, but you can make it good. Like you said, if you do a heavy maintenance, you can bring it back. So sometimes, every once in a while, I'll get somebody like, "How do I get rid of a silver bath?" I'm like, "No, you don't get rid of a silver bath. You give it to somebody.
You put it in a bottle and you ship it to them."
Yeah, you can ship it to me. I'll take it off your hands. So that, and then just a lot of it for me, this is just learning from watching the people in the workshops. It's just struggling with the coordination of handling the plate and developing. If you can maneuver the plate, pouring it's not that hard or important really, and then put it in the silver bath and then just go through the whole process of developing and all that. Once they get the sort of the feel for, okay, this is how I flow my developer over the plate, and this is what I'm looking for when it develops, and this is when I rinse. That's the biggest challenge for a lot of people starting out. But as far as issues that I see, people will get black dots, and if it's all over the plate, well, then how was it rinsed? Sometimes it's too many iodides that build up in silver bath, and then you need to go through how to get that out of the silver bath. And then sometimes it's just varnishing. People hate varnishing. Everyone hates varnishing.
Yeah, that's a tough one to learn. It's a lot of mechanics involved there.
It's very for me. It's once you figure out, okay, this is how much varnish I need on the plate, and I'm gonna stop draining now. I'm going to let it sort of wick back, that's the other thing too. I try to make my varnishes so they're a little bit on the thinner side. So people sometimes when they first try it, they'll drain it off, and then they'll get this like a matte area. And what happens is they're draining off too much of the varnish, so they don't leave enough varnish on the plate to give you a nice gloss. So like just getting people over okay, well, with this varnish, you should do it this way. And then that usually solves it. And I've had people say that once you get it, then varnish is no longer your nemesis. You're just on to other projects. So yeah, I think people hate varnishing the most. And I made some YouTube videos that show the whole process. So from beginning to end, including varnishing. So there's one on varnishing that it's maybe not the best, but it does sort of show, okay, this is how I varnish. I don't heat the plate. I don't heat the varnish. It's thin enough that you don't need the heat to make it flow. And I think it's hopefully helping some people
that's
get
great.
over the varnish issues.
Yeah. And that's one thing that I appreciate, at least from you specifically, is your willingness to share your knowledge with other folks as to, hey, there are a lot of different ways to do this, but here's a good way to do it, right? I've seen some good TikTok videos and things that you've put out too, I think maybe.
Yeah, I've done some TikTok. That's based on some things my daughters have been doing on TikTok, and so I said, well, I should do a TikTok channel. I need to make more content. I'm not a good content producer, so I need to work on that. But yeah, I think it's just sharing knowledge. For me, it's great because it's going to drive people and make them want to do it more. But I find it funny that sometimes people will tell me, I talked to this person and they didn't really want to tell me the ins and outs or all about how to do this. And I guess my feeling is the more people, it's not to the point where you're competing with anybody in this process if you're trying to make a living at it, because there's enough people, there's not that many of us really out there doing it that you can't build a niche for yourself. So I don't understand why people don't share sort of their knowledge more freely. I think several people do, but sometimes you run across some people who are like, oh, well, I've discovered how to do this and I'm not going to share with anybody.
Yeah. Mentioning the workshops, how many workshops are you kind of performing on a yearly basis?
I don't know, we maybe do 4 or 5. It depends. We kind of wait for somebody to express interest and then try to set a date. And then once we have a date, then we try to push people into that date. We only do 4 people at a time. We've got 2 people. So the instructor to student ratio is very good. So we've had, you talked about someone who takes a workshop and they don't want to, they're a little bit hesitant about going and shooting on their own or whatever, the reason may be. We've had people take our workshop and then go off and, actually almost become, professionals at shooting, like set up a studio and start doing portraits and stuff like that. So we like to think that we're training people in the process enough that they can go off and, not be afraid to, go out and make plates right off the bat.
Right. How difficult is it for you as someone that's very well versed in chemistry to kind of condense the chemical knowledge down to where the non-chemist can follow it?
Yeah, so for the workshops, we're mainly focused on the process, like explain like what's happening on the plate and all of that. But we don't really, we troubleshoot what's going on, but we don't really get in depth into the chemistry. So it's more about how to shoot and what to look for when you're shooting and developing and all that stuff. That's why I'm saying if I did a more chemistry focused one, I would try to make dirty silver baths, and I would try to make some, we would do some different things with developer and see what that does and help people root cause some of the issues they might be finding
right
down the road.
That's great. Well, Brian, I want to thank you for being on the show today. How do people that want to see your work get in contact with you or even reach out to you for maybe some chemistry or some chemical knowledge?
Well, my website's uvphotographics.com, of course, but I'm on Instagram more than anything else these days. So UV Photographics or whatever, it's at UV Photographics on Instagram. I have a lot of people who message me through there, send me images or whatever. And then through my website. There's a contact page, and that you can email through there. That's probably the best. I'm on Facebook, but not a lot. I tend to stay out of the, hey, what's going on with this? And then you'll have 50 answers. So I let that sort of run its course.
Yeah. No, that's great. Well, Brian, thanks again for being on 10 Questions. I appreciate your time and especially your research that's went into kind of formulating a lot of these different collodion recipes. I can tell that there's been a lot of research that you've done over the last decade into trying to find some valuable mixes that are helpful to people. So thank you for that, and thanks for being on the show.
Oh, great. Thank you for having me.
Great. Thank you. Now hang on just a minute. While this may be the season closer, I want to make sure you know that 10 Questions will return for another season in the coming months. How about a little teaser? I have a bonus episode that will be ready in a few weeks that will reacquaint you with a pioneer of the process. Cue the music. Again, I hope you've enjoyed this week's episode and maybe even picked up some insights that will help you along in your own wet plate journey. I'd love to hear from you on who you'd like to have on in a future episode. So send me a message and follow our Instagram account at 10 Questions with any feedback, or email me using 10questions@gmail.com. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button on your favorite podcast provider. Thanks for listening to me, Chad Shryock, and my expert guests. And I look forward to you joining me again next season for new episodes of 10 Questions.